Hello and welcome back to next One Piece review and discussion. We are here a whole week early because of the festive period. Shonen is on break till next week. However, Oda has obviously finished a chapter. It is leaked early online, and this was a chapter I needed to sit down and talk about because it is absolutely incredible. We have been waiting to see these moments unfold, and Oda has surpassed himself even more with what we find out. So, we need to talk about this. Without further ado, chapter 1170, Reverse. And our cover story request this time comes in the form of Jinbei feeding all of the Straw Hats with bento boxes, but he's in like this sort of like eel station, and all of the Straw Hats are like kid versions of themselves. They're all children, and it's really sweet to see them all in this sort of moment. But nevertheless, we need to talk about this Elbaph chapter. So, last we had left off, Shanks and Gabon were meeting and discussing at Gabon's house about the connection that is formed between Eam, or the Great One, and a God's Knight. And that connection that fuels their super strength, that fuels the ability of immortality, that makes them think they are a god, is really dangerous, because even at Shanks's level currently, at a shallow level covenant, whenever he's close to Marijwa, he says he feels the pull and the sort of draw to follow Eam's orders, and is unable to go against Eam, especially as well that Eam can like listen in whenever they want to. And Shank says that was the reason why he didn't talk to Harold in that moment in Marijwa, and instead spoke to him outside, back on the ground line, because he says at a shallow level covenant, you're not actually that connected to Eam, you're only on the surface, so the further away from Marijwa you are, the less control Eam has. Shanks then goes on to explain that when you form the next level, the Depth Covenant, and probably further, Eam just gets control regardless of where you are in the world. So no matter where you are, no matter what you're doing, Eam has a complete connection and control over you and your actions. And we see this unfolding in Harold. Harold had formed that contract. He was carving the Abyss Pentagram, and Eam had given the one singular order to mobilise Elbaph, get the warriors of Elbaph to follow now Eam and Harold's orders. And Harold, not only his body but his mind, could not go against the order. He had a brief few moments of consciousness before he was completely taken over, and in that time he'd called Yarul and Loki, whom we'd seen many, many times before, arriving at the castle, where probably his final order was Harold telling his guards to like impale him, and that didn't work because his immortality had already taken effect from the Depth Covenant. So it was now in this stalemate of Harold was just destroying everything in the throne room, was gonna, follow these orders to the letter. Eam had infected every part of his consciousness and gave him that order that he had to follow. There was nothing that Harold could do, and he knew this, and he embodied that. He became what he needed to be, and he was just absolutely destroying these other giants. And Loki and Yarul managed to pin him down, and even then it was like the final moment of him pleading for his sanity, of saying, none of it matters now. The 114 years of work I've done it's irrelevant because of what I've done here. I was a fool, I've been deceived. And he explains to Loki, he's like, you're the one who needs to take the throne. You're the one who needs to eat the legendary devil fruit. And he says, you're the one who has to finish me off. Because Harold has now only one goal in mind. And that is to protect the future of Elbaph. And it is so sincere and so sweet that it's hard to then watch him turn into that sort of confident, cocky, overpowered God's Knight that we've seen with like Summer, for example, where he's completely immortal, he's got super strength, he's got these abilities, and he's just so absorbed by this sort of mind control now that he is like, right, Loki, like, the fruit's mine. And Loki's so confused now, being like, he doesn't understand why Harold one moment is saying go and eat the fruit, and then the next moment he's like, the fruit's his. And he's conflicted in this moment, but he's trusting his instinct. He's rushing for the treasure room while Shanks and Gabon turn up to try and distract Harold for a few moments. Ja Rule gets in the way, and then he gets the sword pierced through his head. Like, it is crazy right now in this moment. But Loki had managed to get out of the throne room, get into the treasure room, and then all of a sudden, the hammer of Ragnar started to attack Loki. There was just a treasure chest and the hammer, and Loki was attacked by something. There was a noise, the hammer flew across the room, and Loki had just managed to evade, and that is where we pick up the hammer launching into a nearby pillar and just shattering it, like demolishes a pillar. Loki's like, looks back to the room and it's like, who threw it? Who's there? What is this person like behind the sort of shadow of the chest? Come on out, we're gonna fight here. And then he looks in the room and it's just a chest, literally just a chest behind this locked door, and he's like, this doesn't make any sense. And then behind him, the hammer is like laying on the floor, and the whole ground begins to splinter and like crack, and it looks like the hammer is like increasing its mass, or it's like giving such pressure onto the ground that the whole room just crumbles, like the ground itself. And Loki pins it down to, he thinks it's the castle. It's become this decrepit place that even the ground just shattered. He's like, there's no way that thing is that heavy, surely, he's saying. And then I think he's starting to like click, like, oh shit, like maybe it's the hammer that's doing this. Like the hammer's moving by itself. And in this moment we jump back to Harold, who's like, it's no use, Loki's never going to get the National Treasure. He's never going to get that devil fruit because no one has been able to for hundreds of years. You see, that treasure is passed down, but the problem is no one is able to eat it because no one has ever been acknowledged by Ragnar. Yet that hammer is the guardian of that devil fruit. And, I will be the one who gets acknowledged. Now Harold is saying, I have the power to sort of deal with Ragnar and take the fruit for myself. But Gabon has other ideas, and there's just this massive conqueror's attack straight through Harold, and Harold like winces, like he gets hurt, and he's like, this is it, those wounds, this is how these guys feel pain. And he's like, I don't understand. He's like, a barrage of attacks that drives them into a state of incapacitation. The only way to do this, these guys have a weakness, and that is to coat your attacks with conquerors. And Harold is like, oh fuck, like he's realising Gabon's the threat in the room currently, and he's starting to go full swing at Gabon. He's jumping around, and Shanks like moves out the way. And he's like, how the hell do you know this, Gabon? Like, how do you know what the weakness of a god's knight is? And he looks and he goes, well, you know, back in the day, they would come and try and take you from our ship. And there's a brief flashback, like literally just one panel of God's Knights turning up to Roger's ship and going, oh, we hear you've got a red-haired child in your care. He's, you know, our captain's child. This is a mistake. And they wanted us to hand, like, him over. And Gabon was like, not a chance. Like, we fought back to protect you. So we learned that, you know, back in the day, conquerors was the only thing that could deal with a god's knight. And Shanks is then recalling, he's like, oh, you know, that dude Summer, you know, that guy, he did say something along that line. And Gabon's like, wow, that takes me back, you know, tales from the past, hearing that name. He's like, we were so surprised to find out that, you know, we thought the celestial dragons were all just useless pieces of junk. They were up high somewhere, you know, not bothering. But there was actually a combat force, a deadly group that lived in the Holy Land, and they themselves would call themselves gods. You know, they had this power. It's really strange to think about. And basically Shanks is like, whoa, like, this is mad. Like, that could have been me. Like, that could have been my life, becoming one of those guys. And Gabon is like, you know, that's what they call fate. So Gabon is, like, you know, rushing around. They want to save Harold here. Shanks is definitely wanting to save Harold in this moment, because it is what he describes as doom. He says, you know, it's a doom to become a knight of God. You know, that's it now for your life. And Gabon says, look, there's actually only one hope in this situation, and that's Loki now. There's nothing more they can do. And what's frightening here is, you know, we go back to Loki, and he's being beaten by this hammer. He's like, I'm so confused. What's happening? He's like, I'm being stopped by a hammer. Like, there's no one else here. He's realised now that this hammer is the guardian of the National Treasure. He's like, it's just a hammer. What's going on? And as Ragnar, like, spins through the air, like, builds up a big attack, Loki's had enough and just does a full charged attack here, full lightning from his hammer, full hacky attack, and just swings into Ragnar. But Loki's hammer gets destroyed here, like, completely annihilated. Ragnar just plows through, and we see Loki's like, oh, damn it, my hammer. And, like, Ragnar bounces off to one side. Loki's, like, looking down at just the shaft now of the hammer that is splintered. And he's like, God damn it. Spins around. And then there is just the head of a hammer of Ragnar and the body of a squirrel. We see Ragnar. The devil fruit that Ragnar had consumed is a squirrel with now a big sort of mark on its head, you know, wounded from Loki's attack, like stunned. And it is a squirrel with the head of a hammer. Like, it's incredible. So, tangent now. This is clearly a representation of Ratatoskia, the North mythological squirrel that goes up and down the whale tree, you know, delivering messages, sows sort of mischievous things. It is really the sort of idea that it communicates between two beings, two creatures on the whale tree of Yggdrasil. Oda making Ragnar the squirrel is so clever here in this moment, and it is so good to see that we have not one but two devil fruits that Loki is going to be in possession of. So we know that Ragnar is now, to a degree, a sentient weapon. It is a squirrel. Well, I don't think it's going to be a squirrel that's eaten the hammer fruit. I think it's a hammer, like we've seen in the past with some weapons gaining abilities of devil fruits. It's clearly this really strong hammer that has either, depends on which way we're just going to go here, has just eaten a squirrel fruit. Or this is actually a mythical squirrel fruit known as Ratatoskia. I don't know which way Oda will go. It's one of the two, whether he makes this a mythical fruit or whether this hammer just simply is eating the squirrel fruit. But it is incredible to see. It doesn't like speak, it makes noises and stuff that a squirrel would make, but it doesn't have, its own words and conveys feelings to Loki in this moment. It's more just making those like squirrel chirps and stuff. But this is an important moment now, because in the throne room where, Harold is just laying waste to everyone, Gabon's saying, oh, this is actually a problem. I've never fought against someone who also has Conqueror's Haki, which is very interesting thinking about all the fights Gabon's been around. Clearly, all the opponents that have had it, Roger's the one who's dealt with it, never been him. So interesting to see this is Gabon's first time fighting an opponent who can wield Conqueror's Haki. But in the sort of moments of, complete inferno, Yorul is like, Harold can't get that devil fruit. It has to be Loki. And we go back and we see Ratatoskia now back, well, we'll call him Ratatoskia, the squirrel, no longer with the hammer on its head. It is now in full squirrel form. And it has opened the chest for Loki. It has acknowledged Loki in this moment. And we see this devil fruit that gets picked up. Now, it's probably a regularly sized devil fruit, but in Loki's hand, it is tiny. So the image of the panel, it is a tiny devil fruit, but it looks cool. And Loki eats it and begins to gain this monstrous transformation. We only see it depicted in the shadow, but he gains like claws. It looks like fur or spikes or something. And all we see is like him bounding through the corridors. It looks like a beast on four legs, or it looks like he's at least on four legs. We only see like the front two legs maybe, and his size stretches like a long way. And we see little Ragnar here, the little squirrel, is made up, is overjoyed in his full squirrel form. And clearly he's now a companion to Loki in this. So there is multiple ways this could go here. So with Norse mythology, Ratatoskia communicates between, as the stories go, between two creatures. The eagle that sits atop the branches and the dragon Nidhogger that sits beneath the branches of Yggdrasil. So, multiple options now here. There is still the idea that this fruit is Fenrir, because the symbolism that we've had depicted so far, the reasoning behind choosing Loki as the name and everything to do with Norse mythology. Now that we have Ratatoskia appearing, this little squirrel as a guardian that takes a form of a hammer, clearly we could have a good option of Fenrir. And again, the shadow still leans in that direction. A less likely option, but still could, if we're connecting to now Ratatoskia, is an eagle. I don't think it's the eagle, because the way the form's being depicted, eagle doesn't strike me as where Oda would go. The next most likely option, other than the Fenrir fruit, is the Nidhogger or a dragon type fruit. Now, the question actually should be, would Oda give us another dragon just after Kaido? I know we've had Egghead in the middle, but Kaido was such an overwhelming force for so long. Like, the presence of Kaido was around for a while, and it was a really big build up, and that fight alone was huge. You know, a dude with the power of a dragon. It was such a like pinnacle focus for Luffy to overcome and obtain Gear 5. Would Oda now introduce another character who can transform into a dragon? It's potentially likely, because we still don't know. We've got a good idea if Kaido's going to return. You know, there's an understanding that Kaido probably perished in that volcano on Wano and isn't going to return. He's gone. It wasn't like officially confirmed. You know, we didn't see like Kaido's dead body or anything. But there's a good understanding that Kaido was defeated. So adding in another strong dragon user of a devil fruit is probably needed against what we've seen in the Five Elders, and especially Eames' power. Someone with a strong devil fruit. It could also just be a complete coincidence, and Oda's actually deciding to go a complete 180 to what we're all trying to think, and it's just going to give another monster or another creature towards Loki. And you know, he could go 100 different ways, but Oda has more intent than that, and I think there is a reason and a weight behind the fruit that he's going to give Loki here. This monstrous form that he's attained, alongside now Ragnar or the Hammer having acknowledged him and becoming his now ally, or becoming his hammer. The squirrel has formed a bond with him in this moment, and the two of them, well, clearly, as we've seen in current story, the hammer stayed with him. So no wonder no one took the hammer from Loki. No one could probably move it. We saw the way it can like destroy the floor in the castle. It could have just increased its weight in some capacity, and no giant other than Loki could move the hammer. No one was worthy enough to lift Ragnar other than Loki in this moment. So we don't see the form it takes here. There is a flurry of panels here over this double page. Not once in these attacks does Loki use the hammer. Not yet, anyway. We see he rushes into the throne room, and it's like we are Loki in this moment. Harold stares us down, and he's saying, "It seems you've eaten the fruit, Loki. Show me what this legendary power can do." And there is a flurry of attacks, and we see a claw attack against Harold, and just half his body is just eviscerated, like claw marks, his arms hanging off. It is brutal. And Loki continues, he pulverizes, and there is only one shot of this shadow-like beast that has literally got a grip on Harold while he's on his knees. Loki then reverts back into his just regular giant form, hammer on his shoulder, and he does a massive swing. And Harold acknowledges that Loki has the blood of conquerors. He can wield conqueror's haki in this moment, and he's acknowledging that Loki is a king. And it's these final moments now of Harold's life. He knows it's coming to an end. That Loki's like, "Have you come back to your senses? Like, have I done enough?" And he's like, "No, don't be deceived here, child. You know, this is just what is happening in this for a moment. This, you're gonna have to finish me. You know, I can't go on, like I'm being controlled." And Harold is saying, you know, it wasn't quite that way. He was like, it was my very thoughts that were starting to fall under the influence. He was like, I was beginning to think myself a god. He was like, you are going to be the one now to lead Elbaph with honor. You and your older brother, you are the ones who will ensure the future here. And Loki's like, you are just the absolute worst. You know that, right? Because this is tough now. He's literally stood there with Ragnar in hand, and he's like, you are making your own son take your life. Like, even the scummiest parents would never make their child do such a thing. And Harold, in this moment, like, obviously is acknowledging that and decides to say, oh, just in this moment now between each other, there is one thing I forgot to even say, and that was thank you for the incident about Ida. And he's like, what? And he's like, I didn't properly thank you for burning down the village, the alcohol village, that, it won't bring Ida back, but I appreciate your feelings in that moment. And he understands them, that frustration. And we can see the mark on Harold's arm beginning to, like, burn again, and he can feel himself reverting back. And he says, the Dominion is taking over again. Loki, you have to do this. And Loki, like, swings back Ragnar's like, I'm going to hold a grudge against you for the rest of my life, for making me do this job. And it isn't that, like, Harold is upset. He actually is understanding what Loki is trying to say in here, what Loki is trying to convey. And he just simply goes, you know what? Me too. I love you too, son. And there is a giant lightning crack through the castle as Loki lands. And I mean, this is a double page to end the double page of 2025. This incredible, absolute follow through swing from Loki. Like, I think this is almost akin to the swing that we saw him do against the whale tree. He just cleanly annihilates Harold here. So much so that Harold's entire body shatters. Like, it disintegrates Harold here. This conqueror infused all out attack, and it is a nuts shot of just Loki in full anger, rage, power. Now with this devil fruit, with now Ragnar in hand, and all that is conveyed from Harold in his final moments is to say that Loki, my son, the only thing that matters now is the future of Elbaph. And it is, Loki, like, in tears in this moment. Like, Harold is remembering, like, Loki as a child, and as he's fallen, he's thinking about, the kids that are just outside in this new era that they have created. And Loki had dealt the finishing blow. And I actually think this is where we jump back now. We are going to start 2026 with the main story kicking back up in present time. And I really, really hope we jump back and our little squirrel Ratatouille is just going to be on Loki's shoulder now. I hope during this story he's reverted to his squirrel form and he's just there with Luffy, because this is actually nuts. The fact that we do have confirmation now that Loki himself has a devil fruit, but also Ragnar has a devil fruit. So we've got Loki here wielding 2 devil fruits. We don't know the full extent of the squirrel fruit that Ragnar has, whether it is the mythical version, so it is a Ratatoskia version, so it has more abilities and more power, or is it just a really broken ancient weapon hammer that has got a squirrel power? Who knows? Loki's fruit reveal is going to be the one to watch. We are still being kept in the dark for a reason, but it is being set up as something monstrous. It is either now another dragon fruit because Nidhogger relates directly with Ratatoskia, because Ratatoskia will deliver those messages between Nidhogg and the eagle at the top. It is the only friend that would speak to the dragon. I could see it being very, very much so that it's the dragon. It still could be Fenrir because of the connotation around Ragnarok, ending. I think this is where Oda's going here with Elbaph, a sort of Ragnarok level event on Elbaph now with what Ym is trying to do, taking control of Gunko, and Loki being a person of interest to either cause it or go against it. It is so crazy to see One Piece and Norse mythology clash in this way. It is great. How far on Oda's going to go with it, we shall wait and see. But what a phenomenal chapter. Technically, this is actually the start of 2026, because I guess we've leaked early, but it doesn't officially release till next week, which is after New Year's Day. So this is how we are starting our 2026. Anime finishes this weekend, we go on break, but Elbaph continues on. So thank you so much for watching. I do appreciate it. Let me know what you thought of this chapter, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.